There's a narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman, barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. It doesn't look particularly important on a map, but every single day, approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products pass through this strait on massive tankers. That's roughly 30% of all seaborne traded oil, 21% of global liquefied natural gas shipments. And if this waterway were to close for even a week, global oil prices would spike, supply chains would fracture, and entire economies would face energy shortages. This is the Strait of Hormuz, and it's the single most critical maritime choke point on Earth. Today, we're breaking down why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much, why tankers can't avoid it, what navigation through this strait actually looks like, and how a geographic accident of geology became the pressure point for global energy security. And I promise, after this video, you'll understand that some shipping routes exist not because they're convenient, but because there is literally no alternative. Let's start with geography. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, which opens into the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. The Persian Gulf is essentially a dead end. It's surrounded by oil-producing nations: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Iran. These countries collectively produce over 20 million barrels of oil per day. Almost all of it is exported by sea. And there is only one way out, through the Strait of Hormuz. There is no other sea route. The Gulf is enclosed on 3 sides by land. The only exit is through this 21-mile-wide passage. Why does this matter? Because oil tankers, the very large crude carriers, or VLCCs, that transport oil globally, are massive. A typical VLCC is 330 meters long, displaces 320,000 tons when fully loaded, and draws over 20 meters of water. These ships require deep channels and sufficient sea room to maneuver. The Strait of Hormuz, despite being 21 miles wide at its narrowest, has a navigable shipping channel that's only about 2 miles wide in each direction. The rest of the strait is either too shallow, obstructed by islands, or reserved as a separation zone to prevent collisions between inbound and outbound traffic. This creates an operational bottleneck. At any given moment, there are 15 to 20 large tankers transiting the strait. The traffic is managed through a traffic separation scheme, or TSS, a system similar to highway lanes but for ships. Eastbound traffic, ships leaving the Persian Gulf, uses one lane. Westbound traffic, ships entering the Gulf, uses another. Between the 2 lanes is a separation zone, typically 2 miles wide, where ships are not permitted. This prevents head-on collisions and organizes traffic flow. But here's the critical detail. The eastbound shipping lane, the one carrying fully loaded oil tankers out of the Gulf, runs within Iran's territorial waters. International maritime law states that territorial waters extend 12 nautical miles from a nation's coastline. The shipping lane passes within 6 miles of the Iranian coast. This means that legally, Iran has jurisdiction over the passage. Ships have the right of innocent passage under international law, meaning they can transit without interference as long as they're not conducting hostile actions. But geopolitical tensions mean this right is not always guaranteed. Let's talk about why tankers can't just avoid the strait. The obvious question is, why not ship oil overland? Pipelines? And there are pipelines. Saudi Arabia has the East-West Pipeline, which carries crude from the eastern oil fields to the Red Sea port of Yanbu, bypassing the strait entirely. The UAE has built a pipeline to Fujairah, a port on the Gulf of Oman, but these pipelines have limited capacity. The East-West Pipeline can handle about 5 million barrels per day. The Persian Gulf region exports over 20 million barrels per day. Pipelines can't replace tanker transport. They're supplements, not alternatives. What about sailing around? Can tankers go a different route? No. There is no alternative sea route. The Persian Gulf is landlocked except for the Strait of Hormuz. A tanker loading oil in Kuwait or Saudi Arabia's eastern ports must pass through the strait to reach international waters. The only theoretical alternative is to not use Persian Gulf oil at all, which would require sourcing from other regions. but global oil demand exceeds non-Gulf supply. The Strait of Hormuz is non-negotiable for global energy markets. Now let's discuss the navigation challenges. Transiting the strait is not as simple as driving down a highway. The channel is narrow. Visibility can be poor due to heat haze, dust storms, or fog. Traffic density is high, and the water depth varies. The deepest part of the channel is around 90 meters, but there are shallow areas, underwater obstructions, and shifting sandbars. Tankers must follow precise courses to avoid grounding. They use GPS, radar, and electronic chart systems to maintain position within the designated lanes. The traffic separation scheme is enforced by local coast guards and monitored by regional maritime authorities. Ships entering the strait are required to report their position, speed, and destination to traffic control centers. Failure to comply can result in interception. During periods of heightened tension, military vessels from regional navies patrol the strait, adding another layer of complexity. Tanker captains must navigate not only the physical constraints of the channel, but also the geopolitical environment. Security is a constant concern. The strait has been the site of numerous incidents over the decades. Tankers have been attacked, mines have been laid, and military confrontations have occurred. For shipping companies, this means increased insurance costs. War risk insurance premiums spike when tensions escalate. A tanker transiting the strait during a crisis might pay 10 to 20 times the normal insurance rate. For a cargo worth $100 million, that's a significant cost. But the alternative, not transiting at all, means the cargo doesn't reach its destination, which is economically unacceptable. Some tankers travel in escorted convoys. Naval forces from the US, UK, and other nations sometimes provide protection for commercial vessels transiting the strait. This is not standard practice, but during periods of elevated threat, shipping companies request military escorts. The presence of warships deters attacks, but also complicates navigation because military vessels operate under different rules and may restrict commercial traffic. Let's talk about the physical dimensions. The narrowest point is between the Musandam Peninsula of Oman and the Iranian coast. At this point, the strait is 21 nautical miles wide, but the navigable channel for deep draft vessels is only about 2 miles wide in each direction. This means that two VLCCs, each over 300 meters long, can barely pass each other with safe separation. Imagine two massive ships, each carrying millions of barrels of flammable crude oil, passing within a few hundred meters of each other in a confined channel. The margin for error is minimal. The depth of the channel is also a limiting factor. A fully loaded VLCC draws 20 to 22 meters of water. The channel must be significantly deeper to provide underkeel clearance, the safety margin between the ship's keel and the seabed. International standards recommend at least 10% underkeel clearance, which means the channel should be at least 22 to 24 meters deep. In most of the strait, this is not a problem, but there are areas where the depth is marginal, and tankers must carefully monitor tidal conditions. High tide provides more clearance. Low tide reduces it. Captains time their transits to coincide with favorable tides. Weather also affects transits. The Persian Gulf region experiences extreme heat in summer, with air temperatures exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. This creates heat haze that reduces visibility. Dust storms, called shamals, can sweep across the region, reducing visibility to near zero. Fog is less common, but does occur. In any of these conditions, ships slow down, increase radar watch, and follow the traffic lanes even more precisely. Now let's address the economic impact. If the Strait of Hormuz were to close, even temporarily, the global oil market would be thrown into chaos. Approximately 21 million barrels per day transit the strait. Global oil consumption is around 100 million barrels per day. Losing 21% of supply would create immediate shortages. Oil prices, which are set by global markets, would spike. In previous crises when the strait was threatened, oil prices jumped by 10 to 20% within days. A sustained closure would have far more severe effects. Countries that rely heavily on Persian Gulf oil would be hit hardest. Japan, South Korea, China, and India. import significant percentages of their oil through the strait. These countries have strategic petroleum reserves, stockpiles of oil stored for emergencies, but these reserves are finite. A closure lasting weeks would deplete reserves and force rationing, industrial slowdowns, and energy shortages. There is also the question of alternative supply. If Persian Gulf oil can't reach Asian markets, those markets would need to source oil from other regions: West Africa, the Americas, Russia. But global oil production is not infinitely flexible. Increasing output from other regions takes time. Ramping up production, chartering tankers, and rerouting supply chains can take months. In the short term, there is no replacement for Persian Gulf oil. Let's talk about the strategic implications. Multiple nations have strategic interests in keeping the strait open. The United States has historically considered freedom of navigation through the strait a vital national interest. The U.S. Navy maintains a presence in the region specifically to ensure that commercial shipping can transit safely. Other nations, including the UK, France, and regional Gulf states, also deploy naval assets for the same purpose. But closure doesn't require military action. The strait could be disrupted by mining, by sinking a large vessel in the shipping channel, or by threatening tankers with attack. Even the credible threat of closure can destabilize markets. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, both sides attacked tankers in what became known as the Tanker War. Insurance rates skyrocketed, and some shipping companies refused to transit the Gulf. The result was temporary supply disruptions and price volatility. There's also the issue of international law. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea guarantees the right of innocent passage through international straits. The Strait of Hormuz is legally classified as an international strait, meaning that ships have the right to transit even through the territorial waters of coastal states. However, enforcement of this right depends on political will and military capability. If a coastal state were to attempt to block the strait, it would be a violation of international law. But legal frameworks alone don't prevent such actions. Now let's discuss contingency planning. Shipping companies, oil importers, and governments all have plans for a Strait of Hormuz closure. These plans include increasing pipeline capacity, activating strategic reserves, rerouting shipments around Africa via the Cape of Good Hope, and diplomatic efforts to reopen the strait. But all of these measures are stopgaps, not permanent solutions. Rerouting tankers around Africa adds 6,000 to 7,000 nautical miles to the voyage, roughly 3 weeks of additional travel time. This increases costs, ties up tanker capacity, and creates delays throughout the supply chain. There's one more factor worth mentioning. Technological advancements have not eliminated the choke point. Some people ask, can't we just build more pipelines? Or transport oil by other means? The answer is yes, but not at the scale required. Pipelines are expensive to construct, have limited capacity, and are vulnerable to sabotage. Air transport is economically absurd for bulk commodities. Rail and truck transport work for regional distribution, but not for intercontinental shipping. Tankers remain the most efficient way to move large quantities of oil over long distances, and tankers need navigable waterways. So to answer the fundamental question, 30% of global oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz because there is no alternative. The geography of the Persian Gulf dictates that all seaborne oil exports must transit this narrow passage. Pipelines provide limited relief. Rerouting around Africa is economically costly and operationally slow. And the concentration of oil production in the Gulf region means that global energy markets depend on this single choke point remaining open. It's not a choice. It's a geographic and economic reality. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a shipping lane. It's the physical manifestation of global energy dependence on a single region. It's a reminder that geography still matters in an interconnected world. And it's a demonstration of how maritime logistics, geopolitics, and economics intersect in ways that affect billions of people, whether they realize it or not. The next time you hear about tensions in the Persian Gulf, remember that it's not just regional politics. It's about keeping the oil flowing through a 21-mile-wide passage that the global economy cannot function without. And now you understand exactly why that matters. If you've ever wondered how oil tankers actually navigate through other dangerous straits like Malacca or Bab el-Mandeb, I've already covered that in another video.